Welcome back to the Gill Connections podcast. Man, I am so glad you're here. I'm so humbled to be your host. I really, truly, a lot of people ask me like, how's your day going? Or how's work or how's Gill? I truly have the best job in the world. So like I'm on the clock right now. I get to talk to coaches and influential people in the sport of track and field on a daily basis. And then I get to bring it to you. You got to kind of get the fly on the wall, if you will, to hear these awesome conversations with these awesome people. And I'm excited about today. Today is going to be, I don't even know what's going to happen here in the next hour and a half, maybe 4 hours. Who knows? Maybe we're going to set the record. The record is 4.5 hours. I don't know. You never know what's going to happen. It also maybe could be 5 minutes. Maybe he just kicks me off and we're just done here. But help me welcome the associate director of the famed Penn Relays. That's right. We've got the Penn Relays here today. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Mr. Aaron Robison. Robison. Yeah, it's too early. It's early in the morning when we're recording here. So give me, I don't drink coffee anymore, so I don't have any excuses to wake me up. Aaron, how are you, sir? Welcome to the show.
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. I think this will be a lot of fun. Typically we have coaches and we've had others, just recently we had Dan O'Brien, who, not a coach by any means, but we got to talk a lot about his coaches. We've had Tim Langford from Oklahoma, Dan Paff. We've had some amazing coaches. You have a coaching background yourself, so that's going to be fun to learn. But you help oversee, if you were going to name, maybe the top 5 meets or events, if you will, of track and field, man, 99% of us are going to have the Penn Relays in that top 5. And you get to kind of help shepherd and lead this really amazing event. No pressure, but that seems like a pretty awe-inspiring task, sir.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's pretty daunting and humbling, especially when you figure how many people have been a part of the event over its, we're going on 130 years coming up. How many people have both competed, how many people have attended, how many people have watched, how many people it's impacted their life in one way or the other. And I kind of find those things out on a daily basis from places that you would have never thought, people reaching out. My great grandfather ran in the relays and we lost his medal. Is there any way that, we could order a replacement? I mean, just a couple of months ago, someone had reached out and it was their great grandfather that still had a watch that they won in the 1903 relays. So, I mean, we're spanning so many generations. And it's insane how long and continuous and building upon itself this event has gone until, now we're at the 2023, which will be the 127th running of the event. And that's just wild to me. The only 2 years that it didn't happen were 2020 and 2021 due to the pandemic. It went through World War I. It went through the Great Depression. It went through World War II. It went through the entire Cold War. It just continued on, a stone rolling down the mountain kind of thing. And it's quite the event. And to fully grasp what it means to various people is one of the most humbling and beautiful aspects of the job that I have. I get so caught up, often in the minutia to make sure that the events are running on time, that we have a proper schedule, that everything is seated properly, like all of those details. When those things, when they do happen, that's not what people are noticing or seeing. They're seeing the Penn Relays is a carnival, that it brings back a lot of memories. It's a reunion of sorts. It's really a unique thing that really doesn't exist in the same capacity. It is truly a carnival, and it's a pretty cool experience.
Now, I can't imagine this person exists, but I'm sure there is. Someone who doesn't know the Penn Relays, give us give us the stat line. So how many days, how many athletes, how many people in the stands, give us kind of that. And then we'll take a step back and learn about your journey in the sport. And then we'll get really deep into the Penn Relays. But what's the kind of stats? I mean, what is this, like 100 people, 100 athletes kind of meet? What are we doing here?
So the event goes over 3 days. It's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. The Saturday is always the last Saturday of April. Thursday is primarily day one of high school. Friday is day one of college, day two of high school, and day one for the other gender that didn't start on Thursday for high school. And then Saturday is all finals along with pro events. We do have a few pro events on Friday evening as well. But the pro events are from 2 to 4 on Saturday, kind of during that premier window. And the combined attendance over the 3 days is on average about 110,000. Participants, it's usually about 13,000 high school athletes. It's about 2,000 or 3,000 college athletes, and then pros are less than 100 because there's not a ton of pro events. But the lifeblood of the event is the high school events. There's just so many of them. In the 4x1 and the 4x4, there are roughly 600 teams in each of those events for the boys and each of those events for the girls. So it's a huge participatory event. It's just incredible. It's an international event. We've had teams from something like 37 different countries attend at some point. The most common being those from the Caribbean, Jamaica most notably, but Trinidad and Bahamas have a long history here and a lot of success. And you know, it's just incredible what it's done both internationally and domestically. And from what I've been told, that it's the highest attended track event outside of the Olympics and World Championships. With the one day, always Saturday, the last day of the relays, has attendance numbers as high as one day highs as much as anything.
Man, incredible is the right word when you start thinking about these numbers, and that you're doing it over a weekend, a 3-day weekend. That's quite impressive. I can't wait to kind of delve into like the process, like, when I was coaching, we'd host home meets, and that was an event on its own in regards to the preparation and making sure, teams know where to go, where the people are going to team camps, the whole nine. I can't imagine doing it for over 15,000 athletes and God knows how many teams and what have you. So we'll dive into that. So let's take a step back before that though, Aaron, because, to do a role like this, it takes a lot of skills, maybe we'll learn different skills from coaching, maybe some skills that you learn as a coach or being coached translate. Certainly they do, because there's some, real world things that we do as track coaches and as athletes. So we'll learn kind of what are the skill sets that you need to have to help bring success to the Penn Relays. So let's learn about you and how you got to this point here. So where does track and field start for you? Were you a middle schooler, high schooler? Maybe I don't know, maybe you never did track and field.
Well, no, track and field started for me on day one of life. So my grandfather is Clarence Robison, he was the 1948 Olympian in the 5,000, and then he started as the head track coach in 1949 at BYU, a position he held until 1989. And then my father is Mark Robison, who's been coaching at BYU since 1985. Who's currently the associate director of the program at BYU and was the head men's coach for, I think, 14 years. And so literally my entire being has been involved in track. And my plan and my goal all through elementary school, middle school, high school, and even college was to follow in that same family coaching tree, and with the long-term goal of coaching collegiately. In 2014 that shifted a little bit. At that point, it was the last year I coached high school. I coached high school for 5 years in Saratoga Springs, Utah, at Westlake High School. We had a lot of success. We did a lot of good things. At that point we moved east. My wife took a job with Johnson & Johnson in New Jersey, and I started grad school at Rutgers. And somewhere in there was a slight shift of, did I still want to coach? I knew I was going to be involved in the sport. I just didn't know exactly how, as I was kind of exploring different options and things. while in grad school, I worked for an organization called the National Athletic Institute, which what we did is we represented both able-bodied and para US athletes to help kind of build in a structure to relieve the funding gap. And that was my first exposure to the sport on the other side, the non-coaching side. I was the program development director, so I did a lot of camps and clinics, put those events on, and kind of developed the sport from that capacity. After I graduated from Rutgers with my master's degree, an opportunity came up at the Armory in New York City, just as a seasonal staff member to be involved in the sport there. And my dear friend and mentor, Tim Fulton, took a chance on me, helped teach me, the world of meet directing and what that looks like. And at the Armory, meet directing is kind of in this, it's in a small tin can kind of thing. It's tons of people, one day events that have as many as 5,000 athletes. And in a small capacity like the Armory, an indoor track and field facility. And so I learned firsthand from Tim, who I think is probably the best meet director in the country. Tim taught me the sport from that aspect. And within about 6 months, the Armory then hired me full time, where I was the assistant director of track and field. And then upon the retirement of Jack Pfeiffer, I became the director of college track and field there. And I managed I was the meet director for all of our college events. And the high school events, it was all about volume. The college events, it's just a little bit different, and got to kind of learn exactly how to be a good meet director for a college event, including the Dr. Sander Invitational. And I was on the staff with Milrose and several of those kind of things. Which just, again, it helped me in kind of guiding me and teaching me the sport from a professional standpoint, teaching and guiding me the sport from a college and high school standpoint. And then fast forward to 2021, upon the retirement of Dave Johnson, the director of the Penn Relays for 26 years, Steve Dolan became the new director of the Penn Relays, as well as being the director of the Penn Track and Field program. And so then they were looking to hire an associate director, and that's the role that I eventually got. I applied and was able to get this role here at Penn. And so my role now here at Penn, it pretty much takes all of those different aspects that I learned, both as an athlete, the aspect of learning the pro side of it, the high school side of it, the college side of it, and everything. And now in my role here at Penn, as the associate director, I'm in charge of the operations to make sure that, I'm the boots on the ground to make sure that the meet's staying on time, that we have that schedule fine-tuned, and that the meet rolls on over the 3 days, and we end when we say we end, and we start when we say we start.
So let's pause there. Let's unpack a lot of this story of yours here, Aaron. I mean, I don't want to gloss over some really important, interesting facts. So go all the way back. I love that you said, track started for me on day one. And you literally meant the day you were born. You are immersed in track and field. I know your dad well, and one of the most authentic people in this sport. I deal with a ton of track coaches, and a smile is always on my face when I get to talk to your dad, man. I didn't know your grandpa's history there, an Olympian in the 5K. I feel like I missed out not knowing him, to be honest with you. If he's anything like you and Mark, good God, that guy, he started it all. He was the rock that Robison was built on.
I think that he was the pinnacle. My dad is the closest to him, and then I come in, a distant third in trying to stand up to what they have done. But no, they've impacted a lot of people for sure, and that's the one area of coaching that I definitely miss, is that daily young person interaction. There's nothing more rewarding than those types of things.
So I know of your dad I know of him as a very good field events type of coach, but you were a distance runner. How was that being a coach's son? And maybe Mark's a coach. So I'm pigeonholing when I say field events, but the guy could probably coach anything. How was it growing up a coach's son, being at a track meet, probably from the day you were born, type of attitude there?
Oh, it's kind of interesting. Even though my grandfather was also a distance runner, he coached all the field events. And I think that was primarily because in the 40s when he started, it was easier to find assistant coaches that could do the sprints and the distance runners. And so he learned, I mean, he knew all the events, he learned the events, he could coach anything. And my father followed that same pattern. My father was also a distance runner. He was a distance runner at BYU.
Mark?
Uh-huh.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
800,
wow.
1500.
Huh.
And so when he graduated in the early 80s, and he was there at the same time, Doug Padilla is a year older than my father. So Doug Padilla, Paul Cummings, and then a couple of years after them is when Ed Eyestone came about. Ed was there in the mid 80s. So it was really a heyday of middle distance runners at BYU at that time. And my father was, right there in that mix, not to that same level. I mean, those guys were world class.
Yeah, that's a heck of a level.
But and so he knew upon graduation that he needed to become a track coach, right? A coach should know every event, and whether they coach those events or not, they should know every event. And so, as a distance runner, he obviously knew the distances. He understood the dynamics and things behind sprints and hurdles. And so he became, a field event coach, specializing in the jumps and the multis. And obviously, as a multis coach, that's extremely important. You've got to know, you can't just pass them off to other people, and then you're at the competition, and oh well, what do I say now? So, and so when he came back to BYU in '85 after graduating, he started grad school and was a grad assistant at that time for the last few years under my grandfather. And he learned the field events and became the field event coach upon my grandfather's retirement in the late 80s. And then that's what he's coached his whole career. So for me, like, I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do as well. Though I was a distance runner, my family is 5 boys and 1 girl. My oldest brother, Nate, was a distance runner, and Nate was 6th at the 2004 Olympic trials, just missed the 2004 Olympic team. And was a 7-time All-American at BYU and between cross country, indoor and outdoor. And so he was a very, very good distance runner. And then I was kind of following my brother's footsteps, and, thought, yeah, I'm going to be, a distance runner as well. Started in high school, was very mediocre. My senior year, I finally dropped about 30 seconds off my mile, and was able to walk on to BYU and made the team as a distance runner as well that next year. And I was my brother Nate, all my siblings are fairly tall. I'm 6'8", and when I started running, I was about 5'10", and then I grew about 8 inches in 3 years, and it wasn't coming together. And I mean, obviously now in hindsight, when you're growing and you're structured like a baby giraffe, it's hard to put one leg in front of the other and do anything. Finally, my senior year, that slowed down, and then I could finally put in, the training and the coordination came and everything, and it kind of all came together. But then even in my career at BYU, it was lots of injuries. I could never stay healthy, which made sense. I mean, I was 6'8", 180, 190 pounds, trying to do 80 to 90 miles a week. That's just not going to work. And so, I mean, I had some moderate success, but it was such a great experience for me. 1, just, teammates and friends and things. 2, being able to be there with my father on a daily basis, even though he wasn't my direct coach. I was coached by Ed Eyestone. But then just being able to learn the sport from the inside, like getting to see it from a different perspective. All growing up in elementary school and in middle school, and to a lesser degree in high school, because I had my own competitions, but I went with my dad anytime I could. I went up to the Idaho State Mini Dome more times than I can count, as I was extra piece of cargo on the bus that went up there, and got to follow my dad around. And I learned the sport firsthand from him, listened to as he instructed his high jumpers, and he's instructed his long jumpers, the sprinters and everything. And I was just mentored by so many of these world-class athletes that were on the BYU team, and got to see incredible things. I got to see when Leonard Miles Mills broke the NCAA record in the 55 that also tied the world record. I got to see, though she wasn't on the BYU team, but when Stacy Dragila broke the world record in the pole vault for the first time, you know, like I got to see those kind of things. I got to be mentored by, you know, world-class athletes and world-class coaches and everything. It opened my eyes to the sport. And, you know, I learned firsthand, like, one, you know, how you interact with athletes and how you coach and how you do all those things, that when I did then start coaching high school, after I was done collegiately, I just had, you know, some innate things, some things I had just, you know, almost gotten from osmosis, if you will, from my father, who had gotten them from his father. And those are some of the most cherished memories, as I think back on the hundreds of athletes that my dad coached, that, you know, I was their little brother, and they, you know, teased me and played with me, and they were over for our house on Thanksgiving and those kind of things. And even, you know, to a greater extent, I got such an incredible exposure, as here I was, a kid growing up in Provo, Utah, not the most diverse places, but I got exposure to people from all over the world. As so many of my dad's athletes were either from Africa or were from Europe or from different parts of the world, and learning from them and learning what different cultures were like, and those kind of things was just such a neat experience. As you know, our Thanksgiving dinners and our Christmas dinners and things were a United Nations. It was so fun. We had lots of real fun uncles that you know were members of the team that came over, and so, you know, there was just so much about the sport that I learned while not realizing that I was learning the sport. And now fast forward to 2023, there's so many of those things that I just, you know, I learned innately that I hadn't realized, that, you know, come when I hit my career or later in my life, how important those things would be. And it's been, I'm very, very blessed to have had kind of those unique opportunities, because it's not a very common you know, role or a common path to where I am now.
You mentioned one of the greatest things about the sport of track and field, and it's the diversity. You nailed it, right? So from different countries, different races, different religions, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, to me, different body types. I mean, that's, to me, what makes track and field better than any other sport. You know, football might be close in the sense of like body types. Like, okay, there's a place for big guys. There's a place for skinny guys, there's a guy for fast guys, slow guys. But there's really no place for females in football, as far as on the sport. There's not a lot of other countries necessarily playing the sport, although it seems to be more and more every year. But for track and field, it is the global, worldwide, top to bottom. There's a place for you in track and field. So when you're painting that picture, like I had this picture of like this long table, and you know, there's Leonard Miles sitting there from Ghana, and I just, oh man, that's so really special about our sport. You know, you went to BYU. I got the pleasure. I did a few years ago a trip through Utah, where I went from Southern Utah all the way up to Utah State and BYU, of course, because you're not allowed to go to the state and not go to BYU's campus. It's kind of a law, I think, or something in Utah. But it was my first time that I've been on campus, and was really blown away. I mean, first of all, the buildings themselves, fine, you know, buildings are buildings, but they all look kind of new. I don't know how new they were, but they all look new. But the mountains where the track sits, I mean, it was kind of fairy tale-ish, you know, just like, wow, this is a real place. Your dad gave me a great tour. I loved it there. BYU has a fantastic history in the sport of track and field, as you mentioned. In fact, the women's distance coach there now, Diljeet Taylor, she's an alum of the podcast, and actually one of our top 5 ever listened to podcast. Had a fantastic time getting to know Diljeet and the success that she's having. You mentioned Ed Eyestone. Come on, man, your dad, what a Hall of Famer. The Arrhenius, how do you pronounce Nick's last name?
Arrhenius.
Arrhenius, the Arrhenius family that has gone through BYU. I mean, it's Hall of Fame material left and right. As you went to BYU, you said, because of this immersion, that you were learning the sport and learning coaching by osmosis. What a great description there. What did you major in? Was it like, I'm going to be a high school coach? Were you an education major?
Yeah, it was education. It was within the Department of Exercise Science. It was a physical education, teacher education major. The plan was to become a high school teacher and coach. That was everything I had planned. And so when I graduated from BYU in 2009, that fall, I was lucky enough to get a coaching and teaching job at Westlake High School in Saratoga Springs. It was a brand new high school. It was just opening up. And I got to be their first track and cross country coach. And it was such a humbling experience. I had 3 kids on my cross country team that fall that had ever run a race before, a 5K, a high school race, anything. And it was so awesome because I just got to learn, and no one was going to really care how I went about doing it. We were going to try things, we were going to fail, and eventually we were going to figure things out. And lucky for me, my last year I was there, so that was the fall of 2013 to the spring of 2014. That fall, my boys cross country team was ranked number 24th nationally. We had a lot of success. I think we were still, where did we end up? I think we were either 4th or 5th at the state meet, just because Utah is quite a good cross country state. Our neighbors to one town over was American Fork High School, and then Lone Peak High School was one more over to the other direction, and Harriman High School just on the other side of a small little mountain. And then you throw in Davis High School and all their history and everything. It was quite a challenging time, but man, it was so awesome. And my assistant coach was one of my former teammates at BYU, Chad Durham. We had such a good time. It was, again, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, the thing I miss the very most now that I'm not coaching is just those daily interactions, daily interactions with the young people. Just having an opportunity to kind of see as their life changes, and track and field makes that for the better so often. It's it's a really beautiful thing. There's so much of an individual aspect of the sport that you get what you put into it, and that was cool to watch from so many of these different kids.
How many years did you coach high school?
5 years. Yeah, I was there from 2009 until the spring of 2014.
Was there ever any frustration from you? It doesn't seem like it, because you talked about 3 kids who never run and you're like, it was awesome. But I started thinking about the background and the level of track and field that you were at up until this point, right? I mean, being around your dad, being around BYU, your brother's successful. I mean, good Lord, your lineage is your dad's or your grandpa was an Olympian. I mean, and then you go into high school, which, first of all, even if you'd have taken over an established program, the level of high school track and field varies immensely. You're taking over a whole new program. Was there any like, oh man, I thought this would be easier. I thought we just come in and hit the ground running and they would just all become All-Americans or whatever. Or how did that go for you kind of emotionally there?
Certainly. I think anyone that takes over a high school coaching job when you haven't been at that high school level in a long time, they kind of have an awakening like, oh, not everybody on the team wants to run 5 or 6 times a week. Not everybody on the team really is doing this for anything other than social reasons.
That's right.
To drop something on a resume. And so like, you learn that. But the thing that I had always had established into me from both my father and my grandfather is they're people first, they're athletes second. And so when I had that opportunity to really get to apply that, right? Like none of them are currently athletes. So there's got to be some type of what's the benefit here, right? Like, what can I do for this person? And the funny thing is, when you think that way, when you are more concerned with them as a person, then all of a sudden the success comes very, very quickly, because now they see that you care about them, whether or not they are first or last, that you care about them, during practice, during meets, whether it's beneficial for you as a coach or not beneficial for you as a coach or a team or whatever, then all of a sudden that's where all the buy-in comes in. And, I felt like I was okay at this. And then my assistant coach, Chad, is the best at this. And Chad was the rah guy, the guy that got everybody just feeling, all warm and fuzzy. And so the combination of the two of us, with that being our primary goal, the success came. And, we did get some really, really good kids that were, good right off the bat. But when we were able to apply those principles, we started seeing some success, and we had some really good kids, and Chad is still coaching at Westlake now, and they've sustained the success, and they've had some really, really good kids come through that program. I also was really lucky my first year coaching high school track. So cross country, it was a bit of a challenge, but that year in track, we had a German exchange student that fast forward, he ended up being a 3-time All-American in the 400 hurdles, and he was 12th at the World Junior Championships the fall or late summer after that year. So the first year in track, we actually had a lot of success.
Wow.
Because we had this one young man, Max Scheibel, who ended up going on to do some great things, ended up running, how fast did he end up going? I think in college, he went 50.1 in the 400 hurdles. So, he was very, very good. He made a couple of NCAA meets and things in college. And so when, you're blessed with an athlete like that, all of a sudden, I think he qualified for 6 or 7 events at the state meets. All 4 events that he ended up doing at the state meet, he placed very high. And so, our first year, we were like 4th or 5th at the state meet, thanks to one German exchange student, so, I had some luck involved in there too, but it was awesome.
So I heard 2 things as you're talking about the program, as you were starting it, and expectations. One is meeting the kids where they are today. That, you may have come from a great program, you may be used to Olympians and All-Americans, but you know what? Okay, here's a kid, Joey, showing up, and Joey thinks it's a good idea to do cross country, but he doesn't even know what it really is. He did the mile back in middle school and didn't win it, by the way. Meeting them where they are. So I heard that. And 2, I heard that you are not the rah guy. You said Chad was, and you said, so we had the 2 different people.
Yeah, I was to an extent, obviously instilling those same things that I mentioned, from my father and grandfather. I could be the rah guy, but that was Chad's main thing, right? Because also as the head coach, you also have to be the bearer of bad news sometimes, and you have to be the, kind of the good cop, bad cop. I had to be the bad cop more often. And so that was the beauty of having Chad there with me, is because Chad's personality was just warm and uplifting that he could really be that, while I had to be the other. And most of the time we didn't really have to do that. And I could definitely be the rah guy, but at the same time, I wasn't the rah guy. It was also kind of funny as we went along. If a kid was ever going to miss practice, they went and found Chad, not me, because they knew that I would tell them no and give them a hard time. But Chad would be like, okay, yeah, I'll let Aaron know, kind of thing, And so it turned into that mom and dad kind of situation too, where the kids knew what answer they were going to get from what coach, so they went to that coach accordingly. It's hard
to deliver the positive rah when it's like, hey, Joey, you're not making the trip this weekend. Yeah. It's like, all right, well, someone has to still deliver that news.
Oh, for sure. And with that though, like, it was also just, it was just, a mom and dad is kind of, in fact, that's what the kids had gotten to the point of, that we were mom and dad, even though, it was 2 male coaches, right? But it was a lot of fun. And, just some of the most tremendous experiences, some of the best memories were all, just all that coaching and learning from different coaches in the state of Utah. The state of Utah does an incredible job at the high school level with more than just the distance runners. The distance runners kind of steal the headlines, but there are some incredible athletes that come out of that state year after year in a state of just over 2 million people. It's really, I've got a lot of pride in, my home state, and especially track and field from my home state.
Yeah. I would agree. Coaching as a profession for the sport of track and field is special. I did it on several different levels: high school, junior college, D1, and Power 5. And we had some major success. I had a 4x1 run 38 point and 3.0, what did we run? 301, 3 flat in the 4x4. And I still remember that my first 2 years of coaching high school in Chicago. I've told this story in the podcast before, and it's where I'm going to tell it again. I still remember Robert 3. I'll never forget Robert 3. This was 95. So this is 28 years. Oh my God, I'm old. 28 years ago, Robert 3 was a freshman for us. I was at De La Salle High School in Chicago in the Catholic League. And, he was not good. I don't think Robert would, if Robert's listening, I don't think he's cringing right now. He was a 6:15 miler. And at the JV Catholic League meet, he ran under 6, right? I don't remember what it was. I just remember it was under 6. Now, we have these time commitment,
Sure.
right? Sub 6, sub 5, sub 4, right? And sub 6 was his sub 4. He was striving for it. And at the junior varsity Catholic League, he runs 5:50 something, I'm sure. Doesn't place. I don't think that placed there. Catholic League's pretty good in Chicago. But you would have thought he won the Olympic gold medal.
Absolutely.
He is pumped. I'm pumped. His parents are there. We're like doing the little, like the four, the two parents, him and me, and doing the jump around. Like, we were just so pumped. Yeah. And I remember it didn't matter that he finished whatever. I don't even remember what place he finished. Heck, he might have scored. I don't even know. But it was that he achieved a goal that he'd been busting his butt for all year. Now, a lot of times on the college side, it's like, oh, that's nice, but you still didn't do anything in conference or qualify for nationals. So see you next year. This was the Super Bowl for that kid and for me. Like, there's no miss. I still remember that, and it's so special. It's different on each level. There's differences, but man, that high school level, it's amazing.
Oh, and that's the beauty of high school, right? Because there's not those extra pressures. There's not the there's just so few of them that are actually going to run beyond high school anyway.
Right. What's the percentage? Is it 7 or 9? It's not 10. It's single digits, I think, if I remember last stat I saw. Yeah.
And so like it's very, very challenging. So, you're going to coach those kids a little bit differently, but similar to you, one of my most fond memories, I can still remember her name and everything, I won't say her name on here in case she's listening and be embarrassed or whatever, but was also not the most talented, but she was so wonderful. She did so much for the team. She was such a positive influence on everyone. And when she broke 7 minutes in the mile for the first time, it was that same type of experience. Like, she had that day, that one day that everything felt great. And I'll always remember the look on her face, high five and hugging me, and my assistant coach doing kind of the jump circle thing, and yeah, I don't know if she beat anybody that day, but that didn't matter. That was one of the cool things.
We should have had her race my guy. That'd have been a good race. I think on an average day, that'd have been a good race.
And part of the reason that I did the sport myself in high school, just like every other kid, I thought I was going to be an NBA player, or I thought I was going to play Major League Baseball or whatever. And you kind of come to a quick realization that those things aren't going to happen. And part of the reason, like in high school, that one, I did it is one, because, track and field was kind of, ingrained in my family, but two is because I was good at it, right? Like, I was beating people, I was running fast, I was making the state meet, I was having those opportunities. I had some teammates in high school, and then even kids that I coached in high school, that like, they never beat a soul. And yet they still showed up to practice on time every single day. Right. They still were the ones at practice. They were the ones building each other up. They were the first people out there cheering for their teammates in whatever the race is. And that, to me, like, that was impressive. Like, those are the kind of people that I aspire to be. Like, here I was doing the sport for a bevy of different reasons, but if I had sucked, I would have found a different route. Like, I don't think I could have done that, and that's not a slide on those people. That's more of like a, wow, this is impressive.
Hey, that's the kind of people I strive to hire today. Teammates, positive teammates, that it's not all about you. Give me that boy or girl, that man or woman right now. I'll take them in a heartbeat, man.
Just love the sport, and they love the teammates, and they love people's accomplishments. They're not in it for themselves at all. And that's one of the things that's really, really challenging in the sport too, is that there's not a shortage of people that are on the other end of that spectrum, right? Like that, may have had some success in the sport or had a lot of success, and they go into coaching, and it's harder for them to be able to relate with the kid that's struggling, or relate with the kid that, like, why are you happy? That time's horrible,
Right.
like that's the unfortunate side of it too. So trying to balance those things out. And that's the purity of the high school sport. The high school sport is just so fun. And that's why the participation numbers are so high and everything, because it's a great extracurricular activity that, you can go out and you can challenge yourself. And if you're not good, that's okay, because you've got some tangible data that you can strive to improve upon. And
so
it's cool.
Let's fast forward. I want to talk about, before we get to the Penn Relays, the Armory, because this is another, iconic facility in our sport. Iconic meets are run there. Hall of Famer, Olympian, world record holders compete there on an annual basis. And this is actually one of the facilities I've never been to. I actually have not been to the Armory, but everything I hear is it's a crazy zoo. It is just, you talked about one day events having 5,000 athletes, and this is indoor. That would be a mega outdoor track meet, and we're talking about indoors. And I think the Armory just announced here recently, I think they're now the Nike indoor track and field facility. So they got a nice sponsorship with Nike, helping out the sport, which I always love and appreciate that. Tell us about the time at the Armory and some of the things maybe you learned for that very unique situation and facility.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. The Armory atmosphere is second to none. It's close quarters. Everybody's right on top of each other. You're in the, upper Manhattan. So there's just people everywhere anyway. But in the Armory for a big high school event, and you have a fast race or whatever on the track, the 4x2 specifically, the 4x2 is so much fun at the high school level indoor, because it's like the 4x4, but faster, because it's a shorter distance, because everybody's doing one lap. And the energy and the excitement and everything in there is just, it's so much fun. And the Armory hosts so many meets, and the atmosphere is just incredible. They have done an incredible job with the facility. I mean, just 30 years ago, the facility was complete rundown. The city was trying to decide whether or not they were just going to knock the building down, or they were going to restore it in some capacity. And Dr. Norbert Sander, a physician at the time, decided that he was going to lead a group of investors and revitalize the Armory and bring it back to being an indoor track and field facility. At the time, it was a homeless shelter, and it was a very, very bad homeless shelter. This was the early 90s. That part of New York was the coke capital of the world, and it was just a very bleak outlook for that area. And Dr. Sander had a vision of what he wanted it to become, and he made it happen. And he, in 5 short years, turned that facility into a fast track again. They found another portion of the building. The building itself is huge. About 60% of it operates as the Armory, and 40% of it operates as a homeless shelter. So it's still a homeless shelter
Today.
Now, those portions of the building, you can't go back and forth between them. So it's not like the kids running in a meet and, homeless people are wandering around on the track. Right. It still operates as a homeless shelter, and it really helped revitalize that portion of Manhattan. Across the street.
I don't know that many people know that we were seemingly pretty close to losing this iconic facility.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
It was bad. It was really, really bad. The facility was so run down. The facility was built in the I think it was 1912 is when it was completed. And it was originally part of the military, and then it just, had gone over to the city, and then the city was managing it, and it was a homeless shelter. In fact, the large open area on the 3rd floor where the track is, there wasn't a banked track in there. This is the 80s and 90s. It was just cots, and cots all the way across that entire space. And that's where the various homeless would come and sleep, and they'd even blacked out the top windows that go all the way around the top of the track. And so Dr. Sander got a group together. He'd run there in high school. He wanted to revitalize it. within a few short years, he had it back and operating, and high school meets were back in there, and they helped find a better portion of the facility and cleaned it up for the homeless shelter to operate. And that was kind of the birth of the Armory Foundation, which the Armory is operated by the Armory Foundation, which is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization with their primary goal is to, this is the motto is to keep kids on track. And they do that both by the track itself, as well as an Armory College Prep program, which is an after-school program for kids there in Manhattan, to come and do everything from FAFSA applications to scholarship applications to math tutoring to special projects to you name it. And the only requirement, it's a free program. The only requirement is that the kid is a member of their track team. They don't have to be good. They just have to be a member of their track team. And it is an incredible program. So that building and Dr. Sanders' vision has just completely revitalized Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan.
I love highlighting people that are, I don't want to call them on the outskirts of track, but they're not the forward facing. So, you know, we've had amazing people like Mouse Holloway and Dilgy Taylor and Boo Schexnayder, and in the coaching realm, obviously for track and field, like there's three amazing people that we know about. Hearing a Dr. Norbert Sander, like he affected the sport of track and field through his philanthropy. Like, thank goodness this was his, I mean, he obviously had maybe resources to help out a lot of different things and places and people. Thank goodness for our sport. The Armory was on his list of like, hey, no, this is important for a lot of realms, not just track and field, but for homeless as well. Let's get this thing up and going back up to where it needs to be. Like, thank goodness Dr. Sander and there's people like him. Recently we lost the great Bob Hirsch. Not a lot of people maybe know who Bob Hirsch is or was, who just recently passed away, but another guy in the background, and Bob would like that. He wanted to be, you know, in the background, but has done so much to move our sport forward. I love that story there about Dr. Sander, man. Thank goodness for Dr. Sander.
No, he did incredible things. He would not let the city tell him no. And he continued to, he found private investors, he found partners, he created the Armory Foundation's board to do exactly that, to be able to just to do all of these things. And he was a bulldog. He wasn't going to be told no. And he had tremendous success in the sport. In fact, he's the last New Yorker to win the New York City Marathon. And
so he was legit. Like, he wasn't just a track fan and was on the team back in the day.
Ran at Fordham, both high school and college, and had a lot of success. And while he was going through medical school, he won the New York City Marathon. And then fast forward well into his medical career, he went about revitalizing the Armory. And then when he passed away, this was my first year at the Armory, so that would have been March of 2017. And the reins were handed off to co-presidents Rita Finkel and Jonathan Schindel, and they have continued to take Dr. Sanders' vision and just grow it out. Wow. And they've continued to do incredible things. You know, the Milrose Games was forever at Madison Square Garden, and the Armory brought it to the Armory to revitalize the meet and to get it back to national prominence, which it most definitely is.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us, what was your role there at the Armory? And tell us about, like, you mentioned a lot of track meets, and that's kind of what I always think about with Armory. I'm like, man, it seems like they have one every day, and maybe that's true. How many track meets, and what was your role? What were the things that you were learning in your role there at the Armory?
So while I was at the Armory, my final title there and my main responsibilities, I was the director of college track and field and the director of track and field finance. So I was in charge of all of the contracts and everything on the finance side, the money collection, all of that, in addition to my college duties. And so I was in charge of putting together all of the registration. Okay, so let's say you have the Hispanic Games coming up. The Hispanic Games is one of the larger meets that the Armory puts on. 2-day meet in the beginning of January. Averages anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 athletes over those 2 days. So just massive high school indoor meet. And so I was in charge of all of the registration and everything that dealt with contracts and finances and all of that. And for an event like that, it's putting together the thousands of packets, you know, so coaches can come and pick those up with their bib numbers and everything. It's managing what our budgets look like for that event. right? So what is our income? Our primary income with that, is just meet fees. How are we managing that? How are we collecting it? How are we tracking down, coaches that submit a PO and then it needs to be paid later? Just that whole process. And that was, that meet, along with the Armory hosts in their facility between about 10 and 15 events a year. Then what they contract out is other meets and other organizations that come in and they host their own meet under the guise of the Armory's supervision. So, for example, in New York City, you have the PSAL. The PSAL is this public school athletic league. It's the largest athletic league of its sort in the country. It's all the New York City public schools. And so all the PSAL meets are there. And so that totals about 45 or 50 events. It may even be a little bit larger than that. Wow. From November to end of March. Section one of New York, that's Bronxville, North Rockland, New Rochelle, the areas just north of New York City. Section 1 has all of their championship events there, as well as a lot of their regular season meets. And then there's other, organizations that have one meet there a year, like Rutgers, for example. Rutgers has one of their college meets at the Armory coming up in just a couple of weeks. Columbia hosts a couple of events. Just the majority of the events that are at the Armory are hosted by another organization that's just renting out the facility. Yeah. But then, of course, everything is under the supervision of the Armory. Like if you're coming and having a meet here, then this is your start time, this is your end time. You can't do X, Y, and Z. We need to make sure that you're good stewards and doing those kind of things. So, yeah, the Armory, it was all hands on deck. We'd have these large events, notably the Milrose Games, and everyone was involved in some capacity to make sure that the event could go on. It was a world-class event, and a lot of things to do and accomplish. And it was really, really neat experience. Just working day in, day out with, some of my now dearest friends and former colleagues in accomplishing this gargantuan task that November to April every year it was exhausting.
Yeah.
And by the time that you got to March, New Balance Nationals more or less was the last meet of the year that was there. You'd get through that meet and you'd big exhale, and then April is time to start putting contracts together and preparing for the next season. So, as that feeds into now what I do with the Penn Relays, though, it's simpler in some ways because it's only one event, but it's significantly more difficult in other ways because it's the largest event. Right. It's all of those events that the Armory did compounded into one thing, one 3-day weekend, and it takes an army to make this event happen. It's incredible to just see how the Penn Relays goes.
So let's translate. I don't know. Sometimes transition. There you go. Sometimes, again, I always tell people, remember, I was high school and college educated in the state of Alabama. So words don't come easy for me. All right. Just be glad I'm not saying y'all and sweet tea every other word. All right. Let's transition to the Penn Relays. So you mentioned another guy who not a lot of people might know his name, but boy, instrumental in the sport of track and field, Dave Johnson. So on one hand, like when people retire, like I'm usually like extremely happy for them because I'd like to retire one day too. So I'm kind of like, oh, I'm jealous. You actually did it, because at this age and stage, I'm like, I just know how could I ever retire? So bravo that Dave Johnson retired, that he was able to retire. But for a guy who did the job and did the job so well for so long, it's always like, well, how do you replace that? Like, how do you, not just the skill sets that are required, but the experience and knowledge. Like there's just, no matter how hard you try as an organization, there is tribal knowledge. There is knowledge that just doesn't get written down, doesn't get trained. It just, you learn it. You learn that, oh my gosh, we can't start at 8 because that screws everything up. So you got to start at 7:30. If you're going to change, because we're going to talk about this, the girls from Saturday to Friday, well, that creates a whole different schedule change, things like that. and so you mentioned Steve Dolan, and here, a guy, Steve Dolan, head track coach. There you go, busy enough right there. I mean, that is a full-time, and by full-time meaning more than 40 hours a week job, especially at a school like the University of Pennsylvania. He's also now the director of Penn Relays, so he takes that on. He seems seemingly very wise to go get you, you and his associate, like, hey man, I need your help here, because it is a full-time job. What was it like as you transitioned over to the Penn Relays? It's an awesome responsibility to have something special that you are in charge of, that you're helping lead. There's a huge support team, obviously, there at Penn for the Penn Relays, but you're helping lead that. What was it like when you first kind of got the call, like, hey, we're going to hire you, and the first week on the job, you're looking at old trophies and you're getting calls from grandpa's old watch and things like, I mean, those are all, I'm not making fun, those are cool things.
Yeah.
What was it like that first week on the job? Like, okay, here we are. I wanted it, so here, let's go.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just overwhelmed with how much I didn't know. The way that the Penn Relays was, described to me and continued to be reiterated through that whole first, I was hired December 1st of 2021, and the meet was going on April 28th, 29th, and 30th of April, so just a few short months, and we had to lift this gargantuan thing. And it was overwhelming how much I didn't know. And things would come up, and I had no idea. Like, I don't know what's been done in the past. And add into that, Steve and I were both new in that role. You add into the fact that the meet hadn't happened since 2019. So there were a lot of people that within the department that had never been here for a Penn Relays. There were a lot of people, trying to figure out who can come in for volunteering. There were so many different obstacles, and it was extremely humbling. And so what we did is we just figured it out and plowed through the best that we could, and realized that we were going to get the meet on the track. We were going to make it happen, and then we were going to learn a whole lot. And that's exactly what happened. With that being said, I had to rely very, very heavily on people that had done it before. There were people both within the Penn Relays office that, had done this many times, and learning from them and trying to, extract what it is that I can do and what is it that I'm not thinking of. And just, it was a baptism by fire. I knew that once we got to Thursday of the Penn Relays and once it started, then I was in my element. Like, it was still extremely challenging, right, to make sure that the 4x1s were going off on time and that we weren't getting behind in the schedule. But that's what I'd done before. I'd done that at the Armory, not in the same capacity, but I'd done that before. And so it wasn't completely new. And Thursday went off. Well, and luckily we had beautiful weather all 3 days, which that was one of the luckiest things. But Thursday went off without a hitch. We stayed on time. It's a fairly easy day to stay on time. Friday, we got behind. We kept trying to catch back up. And it just, we found out that we'd made some errors within the schedule, and we'd, some growing pains and things there. And then Saturday, again, we had some challenges, but we met those challenges, and the meet started on time, and we made it through the 2-hour ESPN TV window, even though we'd had a block slip and a false start and those kind of things. And when you're in a TV window, and this is what a lot of people may not understand, when you're watching a meet on NBC or ESPN or the World Championships, Olympic Games, or whatever, the producers and the meet director and everybody that's there on the track, you do not want false starts. You do not want a block slip. You do not want any type of recall, because you have such a fine period of time, whether that's an hour, whether that's 2 hours, whatever it is, you have to fit that whole window in. So if you get behind, you've got to figure out other ways to catch back up. And the first events of that TV window were the hurdles and the hundreds. And we had 2 block slips and a false start. And so we were already, I believe, 12 minutes behind once we got done with those events. And so then it just turns into this, this mathematical puzzle, if you will, of okay, how do we do this? And how do I get ESPN to work with us to, they can't cut their commercials short. That's vital. And so long story short, we were able to catch back up. We had built in a little bit of buffer in a couple of different places, a minute here, a minute there. And what we were most concerned with was the last event. And that's what you always want to do. The last event of the TV window is the premier event. Mm-hmm. And that last event was going to be Athing Mo and Ajay Wilson in the women's 600, along with Latoya Gould and among others. And that was the feature. Ajay's from New Jersey, as so is Athing. They were coming home and they were doing this in front of a home crowd. And Latoya Gould, the Jamaican record holder, was there in front of a Jamaican crowd. And it was just such an exciting race. But we were a little bit panicked, like, okay, like this can't come after 4 p.m. because ESPN is no longer going to be here, So those kind of things, like, they were luckily things that I had gotten to experience or see at the Armory with part of the Milrose Games. Milrose Games has that 2-hour TV window. I'd gotten to see, like, how we get back on time from being a clerk at the BYU Invitational when I was in college. Just all of those things, those experiences all come flooding back as you're trying to get back on track. And it was an incredible experience. And there were so many things on my end that I had, my own critiques and whatnot. But the end of the day, the meet went off, and it went off to the general observer without a hitch. And, we learned from the mistakes that we made, and we make sure that we don't make those things again.
From movies and television, I have this knowledge. It's from TV and movies, so it's probably wrong. When they're doing those things, there's the guy in the booth, and he's directing camera 1, camera 2, and they all have earpieces and connected to. Are you earpieced into the director or the ESPN guy and like that, or is it just word of, like, how does that communication even happen? As it's on the fly, it sounds like, because it depends on how many block slips and whatnot you might have.
So this year, with the Penn Relays, I didn't have a headset, but I had somebody that had a headset to the booth right next to me. That person was not very experienced in track, and so I was telling them to tell the booth such and such, and then this, and this is what we're going to try to do. When is the commercial break? Okay, I've got this much time. It was just kind of a back and forth with that individual. At Milrose, which is the other, opportunity I've had, I have been on those headsets, and I've been part of those, production teams and things, and understanding, okay, this is how long you have for a commercial break, and you're doing this and you're doing that. And so I'd seen what that looked like, and I had experience of what that is. And that kind of luckily enabled me to be able to be right there of, okay, we're behind. We got to keep on the TV schedule. We got to catch up. We're going to catch up here and here and here. You got to tell me, how long is this commercial? Okay, when are we coming back? Because the second that comes back, all right, starter, go. We can't have a wasted 30 seconds. So, it was, luckily it was only 2 hours and not the full 36 hours of the meet, that we had to do something like that. But it's a challenge for sure.
That's amazing. You mentioned the meet goes off to the outside observer. It was perfect, like, because we don't see those things when we're watching TV, or even necessarily when we're in the stands. What are some things, help us peel back the curtain a little bit here, Aaron? What are some of the challenges that you're overcoming, so that people from the outside who are watching, or even coaches and athletes, like, you didn't even know that because I worked around this way? What are some of the things, like, how you're doing? I think earlier you mentioned 600 heats, or maybe it was 600 teams of the 4x1s and 4x4. Like, that can't be easy. And you talk about the schedule, and you have to be so exacting for not only TV, but for the meet itself. Yeah. What are some of these challenges, and how do you overcome those?
Well, the biggest thing with Penn Relays is that the meet itself isn't that complicated. It's that it's a large volume, right? Volume is what makes everything more complicated. And within the meet, there are 4 major blocks that all take up a significant amount of time. And that's the boys and girls 4x1 heats, and the boys and girls 4x4 heats. And the 4x1s are even more challenging because you have to clerk 5 or 6 heats in advance. And what essentially happens is you have various clerking stations. Everybody has been split up into, their various sections of the 4x1. On the girls' side, there's always between 40 and 50 heats of the 4x1, and on the boys' side, it's about the same. And then it's the same with the 4x4, and I'll talk about the 4x4 in just a second. But with the 4x1, on the girls' side, we have a gun go off every about 70 seconds. And that's what we have to do and be able to get through that many heats. And it's a large block of time, and it's extremely challenging. And so the process for that to happen is all of the preliminary heats, the teams are given bibs ahead of time. They pick up their packet, and those bibs are then ordered in by the alphabet. Okay, so the first heat and the first lane of the first heat would be AA. Heat or lane 2 is AB, and so on and so forth. So we know that heat 1 is A, heat 2 is B, heat 3 is C, and so forth, which makes it available for both the athletes and the clerks to be able to get them on the track at the right time. And so they move through the various clerking stages. They get to an area that's called the paddock, which is just right there on it's just beyond where the relays finish line is, just right there on that portion of the track. We have 3 of the most experienced clerks that are organizing them on the fly, getting them in the heats, getting them organized. And then when it's about 3 or 4 heats ahead of that person's time, we have what are called zone runners. And these zone runners are, they then take the 3 runners that won't be at the starting line, and they get them to their zone. So they run across the field, they get them to their zone, they let them know what heat they're in and where they need to stand, and they are in a line behind the heats that are in front of them. And so they get them to zone 1, where, first leg hands off to second leg. They go to zone 2, 2 to 3, and zone 4, or zone 3, excuse me, where 3 hands off to 4. And that same flow is going on for the girls. It lasts just under 3 hours, about 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on what a total number. And with the boys, it's a little bit short of that. And so that same process just continues until you get all 600 plus teams out on the track and through the event.
Those zone runners. So the track is busy because it's continually running. Your middle field is busy because you have the long jump, high jump, pole vault. You have things going on there, award ceremonies as well. Do the zone runners have like a dedicated lane on the track to get to their spots?
Not on the track. They go through the infield.
No, that's what I meant. Yeah, I meant yeah.
The throws don't take place in the
Right.
stadium because 1, it's a turf field, and 2, like
how in the world would you?
Exactly. So they go right through the center. They go across. See, the thing that's funny with the Penn track as well is that there is 2 rails. Right, there's a rail between lanes 3 and 4, just because of the dimensions of Franklin Field, and then there's another rail on lane 1. So there's one person that stands there. They probably say watch the rail anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 times a meet.
I was gonna say, when there's one rail, you
Yes,
need to say that
exactly.
repeatedly. 2.
There's 2 rails.
I mean, even if a kid official coach goes there and they're like, you know what, I'm always cognizant of the rail. Yeah. You got 2 of them here in Franklin, buddy.
And everyone trips on it. There's so many people that trip, and we've got. That's actually one area that we're going to fix for this year. So within the rules, we are going to pick up a chunk of the rail, and we'll have cones, just the small cones there to, enact as the rail. We're very lucky that no one has gotten seriously hurt.
Sure.
You're an athlete, you're at the Penn Relays, your mind is somewhere else. You're just like, oh, please don't botch the handoff. Not today, not to now. No. The last thing you're concerned about is you're trying to go get to your zone as someone's hollering at you and this just commotion. You're not worried about some rail. You're not even hearing the person saying, watch the rail. So we're going to pull out that portion of it and make some accommodations there. But anyway, so those 3 runners, the second, third, and fourth legs, they're running to their areas, following behind somebody. They each have their distinguished path. We then have even security that are making sure that, hey, people are coming, watch out.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They get to their areas and the meet goes on and on and on. And it's pretty wild. In fact, one of the coolest things that you can ever see And I didn't get an opportunity to do this last year, obviously, but if you go and sit on the upper deck of Franklin Field during the 4x1s and just watch, I mean, it looks like an Amazon distribution facility. It's people are going everywhere. It's just, track and field is organized chaos. This is like organized chaos at the Amazon facility in December. I mean, it's crazy. And it's just so unique. And this whole process has just been developed over years and years and years by minds that are far superior to me. And the volunteers and the officials that we have here that continue to enhance this and grow this and do all of this are they're incredible. They are from all walks of life. Some of them that we have that come in, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they do other things, and then they come to the Penn Relays and they make the whole thing hum. It's pretty incredible.
In an earlier conversation you and I had, you talked about something that seemingly from the outside seems like a fairly easy thing to do. Correct me where I'm wrong. I believe it was one of the girls' events. It wasn't, maybe it was a 3,000. You fill in the blanks here. A girls' event had never run on Friday or vice versa, and so you were going to flip the boys and girls. It was the same event, so it was, again, from the outside, it looks like, okay, just take these however many heats, and just the boys were here, so move them and then move them over. But there was it's not that easy. Fill in the blanks there and tell us about that.
So this year, for the first time, the high school girls are going to be competing on Friday and Saturday. So in an ideal world, we'd be able to have the meet go over 3 days and we could split high school boys and girls and just kind of have it smooth throughout all 3 days. Unfortunately, because of those 4 main blocks, that doesn't work, because those 4 blocks have to be separated because it's just too much time. You can't get everything in. And so last year was actually the first year that the college teams were only Friday and Saturday. Like before that, the college women were Thursday and Friday. The college men were Friday and Saturday. And, Thursday historically had been Women's Day at the Penn Relays. So last year, we adjusted that to where the college men, and this is easier for the college programs, the college men and women were together on Friday and Saturday with a few distance events Thursday evening. And this last year, the high school girls were Thursday, as they always had been. And on Friday, they conclude. And then the high school boys start on Friday, and then they conclude on Saturday. And so for this year and for every year hereafter, the high school boys and girls will take turns. 1 year they'll be Thursday, Friday for the boys, and the girls are Friday, Saturday, and so forth. And so when we made that switch and we adjusted everything, one of the challenging things, again, coming back to those big 4 behemoth prelims, when you take the high school girls 4x4 off of Thursday, where there is a lot more time, and you put it Saturday morning, where the high school boys 4x4 had been historically, now we have an extra 35 minutes that we need to come up with, because with the high school girls, the 4x1, it's not as relevant, right? It's like 15 minutes longer because it's a shorter event. The times aren't that dissimilar. The high school boys gun to gun is about 60 seconds in the 4x1. High school girls gun to gun, it's about 70 to 75 seconds, maybe even up to 90 seconds if we actually need to slow things down a little bit. We can sometimes get a little bit ahead of schedule. But in the 4x4, it's a little bit more than that, right? For the 4x4, the boys, it's about 4 to 4.5 minutes. 4.5 minutes if we need to slow down a little bit. 4 minutes if we need to catch up or we're humming along. And with the girls, it's anywhere from 5 to 6 minutes. And so now when you factor that by 40 to 50 heats, you're talking about 45 to 50 minutes longer, depending. And so we just had to kind of massage the schedule to make those kind of things work. And it's a lot of time and effort and meetings with me and Steve, and trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? Where do we move that? How do we make sure that we're not changing the whole product? Like there's some things that kind of historically have been in certain places, and people come to expect that. So how do we make all of it work? And there's lots of fine tuning. And again, I was so lucky to learn from Tim Fulton at the Armory. Tim can make a mean schedule and learn how to follow that schedule to a T. And, I learned a lot from him, and that helped me in kind of putting the Penn Relays schedule together. Well, how do I put these chunks in there, and how do we make those chunks work? And so for this year, the boys are going to be Thursday and Friday, which will be really cool. And the girls will be Friday and Saturday. It's crazy when you think of all of the high school girls that have run at the Penn Relays, from the Sydney McLaughlins, the Caitlin Tuohys, even more historically, Marlene Oddie, going way back, all of the various Jamaican women that have come through, and they've never had the opportunity to run on Saturday in front of the Saturday crowd. And it wasn't ever anything, like they weren't doing this maliciously or on purpose. It was just how the event was set up. And it wasn't even until the 80s that the women were involved in the event. And they dedicated a whole day when they expanded the meet to 3 days. The whole day of Thursday was so that the girls could participate. So we're excited for it. It's going to be really, really cool. The quality of high school athletes in the Northeast, as well as in Jamaica, there are just some incredible young women, and some women in all capacities that come and compete, and them being able to be showcased on Saturday is going to be a really cool experience for them and for the crowd as a whole.
How do you talked about the 4 behemoths? How do you, in a meet this size, it's always I don't call it controversial, but a tough topic, limiting events. So how many people can be in the long jump? How many people can be in the 100, 10K relay? Start with your entries for the relays and what you allow there. And then how do you figure out how many of the other event people you're going to allow?
So one of the things that we try to do is we try to allow as many people as humanly possible to have the Penn Relays experience. And that's everything from the carnival that's going on around the stadium, to stepping on the track and handing that, that blue and red baton off to your high school teammate, an experience you'll never forget. Running in front of more people than you'll ever run in front of in your entire life, unless you're lucky enough to make an Olympic Games. Those kind of things, like, that's what we're trying to accomplish. And so we actually don't turn any teams away in the 4x1 and 4x4. We have some very soft standards on those 2 events, but even then, maybe 1, maybe 2 teams are turned away each year. We, hey, coach, this probably is not a real good experience for your kids if they're going to get beat by a minute in the 4x4. That kind of type of situation. And it actually, sometimes it just is straight up a typo, right? The coach just put in, put a 5 instead of a 4 or something like that. But anyway, so we don't turn anybody away in those events. And so we build in enough time there, and we make sure that, we can accomplish 55 heats, or if we need to, we can accomplish 40 heats. And we have a little bit of wiggle room with how much time between gun to gun to be able to get it in those windows. However, with all of the other events, we are much more restrictive, right? And speak on a high school level. So the high school 4x1 and 4x4, those are the 2 main relays. The 4x8, we accept 70 schools to the prelim. That's usually 35 small schools and 35 large schools.
That's still a ton.
It is a lot.
Wow.
And so those 2 groups, they all compete, and the top, I think we end up taking, it's either 10 or 12 4x8 teams to the Championship of America final. And then from there, the rest are, we also have the DMR. The DMR is only 15 teams, so it's very hard to make the DMR field. That's just a straight final. We then take 15 athletes to the mile. We take 25 athletes to the 3,000. And then all of the field events are 16 athletes. So that's the long jump, that's the triple jump, that's the high jump, the pole vault, the throws, the shot put, discus, and javelin. It's 16 athletes. So in those events, we have to be extremely restrictive. And the thought behind all of this is we want to be as inclusive as possible, but also be able to make the meet happen. And so that's why we can, 16 is the magic number, because that's 1 flight, right? That's 1 flight in the long jump or the discus or whatever it may be. And they do qualify for a final, right? So it's, 16
Mm.
athletes, and it comes down to either 8 or 9 for the final. And, it's giving as many kids that Penn Relays experience, but we know with the individual events, we have to be restrictive. It's very challenging, and there's no politics in it. With the registration process for, whether it's the javelin or it's the pole vault or whatever, the coaches have to submit, the athlete that they'd like to be considered. They then also submit their mark and a link to where that mark happened. And then I have a team, it's my high school committee that goes through and they verify every mark. And if it can't be verified, then that kid's time is thrown out. So, we put it back on the coach. You've got to make sure you put in the correct time. And then we just go, just like old school NCAA, descending order list. Here's the 16 that make it. And even once we declare that those are the 16, if a kid gets hurt or things like that, we don't have the means of backfilling that.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because I originally was going to ask, coaches are famous for, but it's a part of our sport of injuries and things like that. How do you, on a regular meet, again, what I call regular 5-team meet, whatever, there's always we showed up Friday morning and it's like, hey, do you have another slot in the 100? Or, hey, I need to pull out the 200 run. How many times do we only seed that when we get ready to do the 200? Because everybody enters and everybody backs out. How do you handle a coach's last minute request, or how do you, in the inverse side, how do you handle the last minute cancellation? You already talked about no backfills, but I mean, how do you seed it and all that kind of stuff?
The last minute cancellation in an individual event, let's say there's 16 athletes, we just don't backfill it. It's all right. Well, then the mile's running with 15 athletes now. And, like we've gotten some pushback from coaches and things on that, but like at the same time, like we're dealing with 13,000 high school registrations, right? Like we declare what it is, and heaven forbid someone gets hurt, but we have to move forward on it, and backfilling would be a never-ending process, and it's just not feasible. As hard as that is to hear for the 17th kid or the 18th kid that's could have gotten in, it's just not feasible. And in a similar sense, the NCAA, like it's much the same way, right? 16 qualify. Well, if someone got hurt, then we go with 14 or we go with whatever. And it's not ideal, but it's the reality of the situation with when we're talking about the sheer numbers. But as far as the relays go, that's the beauty of us. We organize them into pods basically. So we have 45 schools in pod A for the 4x1, and they show up at a certain time, and then we seed them and we get them on the track, right? So we never have empty lanes because we do that. If a team doesn't show up, they don't show up, and we're not even really aware that they didn't show up until after the meet, when we realize, okay, following 6 schools were DNFs. And that happens. Last year, especially since we were, still kind of the height of COVID and things, there were schools that, their relay team came down with COVID. And when you lose 2 kids off your relay, then you can't compete. But the one thing that we don't restrict is when you register those names, like that's kind of your placeholders. Those aren't the 4 that have to run. Now, when it comes to the prelim versus the final, there are a few more rules that are built in there. But as far as like the names that you provided us originally, like we get the new names from the kids when they check in, and then those names are the ones that are properly put into the results and everything. So it's pretty wild.
I mean, it really is wild. I mean, again, hosting a dual meet is hard. I mean, let's be real here with officials and timing and last minute entries and scratches and things like that. Weather, do that dual meet times 1,000, more than 1,000, is quite awe-inspiring.
Well, and that's where we cannot do this without our army of officials and volunteers. It is a labor of love. They get some nice swag, and a front row seat to the relays, but they're doing this out of love for Penn. They're doing this out of love for the Penn Relays. They're doing this out of love for the sport. And it's absolutely magnificent. what they're able to do. Everything from, the starters to clerks to zone runners, and zone runners are often, because there's so much running involved in that position, there are high school athletes themselves that, maybe their team's just not running in the Penn Relays or whatever it be. And they get a lot of running in because they're running to zone 3 and then back and then to zone 3 again. And, it looks almost like a museum tour because they're holding up a little flag that says a 3 on it, and they're running to that zone. Stay with me, don't get lost, you're gonna have a hard time handing off the baton if you're not in the right spot, kind of thing. So
I'd hate to see everybody's step counters for the day.
oh man. Well, and I'm not running to zones, but mine's anywhere from 25 to 30,000.
Oh, easily. So you're back and forth here and there. Yeah.
So what theirs are, I can't.
Yeah. I didn't grow up. So I grew up in the South, so I didn't grow up a Penn relay. I knew of the Penn Relays, but I didn't, and back in the day, we didn't have internet, so I had no clue about results until you just saw the highlights of the, the best collegians and pros, and maybe a, high schooler would do amazing, a lot of sub 4 milers there and things like that. And I went as a coach twice. When I was at Mississippi State, we were a Penn Relays team. So that was my experience there and coaching relays and individuals there. And so there I got to see a little bit more of the results and such. And a unique aspect, at least it appears to be unique from my perspective. So we talked about high schoolers, talked about collegians, talked about pros. I at least used to see like the news media 4x1s, there's masters athletes, I know for sure. In fact, there was a pretty viral, I think it was from last year, video of a 4x1 from the masters that was hilarious. I love that video. I know I retweeted that several times because it was hilarious just to see that whole thing. It was awesome. But there are other, like, I'm going to call them community-based events that are there. How does that play into it, and what's the history and culture of that? Because that seems to be fairly unique.
Yeah, I can't speak a whole lot to the history of it. There currently there isn't a media 4x1. I think that was something in the past, and that was definitely something that was popular. But if there's not enough media members that want to do it, something like that will that will die pretty quickly. However, we still do have a corporate distance medley relay Friday evening. And this last year was kind of fun. One of our sponsors is On. And On's team that they put out there were, 4 ringers, guys that were, former pros and were still in fantastic shape. And then, it's everything from On's team that was incredible. Toyota had 3 or 4 teams out there, just having fun, and then some of the other local groups here in Pennsylvania. And then there's a large contingent of masters. So the masters have a 4x1 and a 4x4, as well as the Open 100. And the Open 100 is the one that we see a lot of, like the 75 and older heat. Is on Saturday, right in the middle of the event. It's a very popular thing. This last year, there was a gentleman, I think, what was he, 101, I believe so. And it was his first time running at Penn Relays in like 65 years. So
I remember that video because I retweeted that and said, what's your excuse? Because here was this guy 100 and something, and it was like, literally, it was kind of, for me as well, it was like, well, what do I complain about? I mean, this guy, come on, I hope I lived it that long, and I don't think I'll be running. And here he was getting after it at the Penn Relays.
Yeah. So, like stuff like that, it's very fun. There are some elementary school like shuttle relays that take place on the infield. On Friday, we do have some middle school races and some things. So, and there's the Special Olympics have a component of it. They race, they do some both Special Olympics as well as what's the term,
like adapted athletes?
Adapted, yeah. Well, no, not adapted. I think it is adapted.
You're talking about like wheelchair and things like that?
No, we don't have that per se.
Okay.
But, we have when it's in high school, kids can be in a course with other kids that are in special ed. And so they do kind of a relay together. It's them,
very cool.
Their high school aides and things. So, we have a lot of those different pieces. And and there's always an ask for more. It's just the event is already so large. It's really challenging to add anything else.
Do you ever think about going to a fourth day, to add in a Wednesday?
It would alleviate some things, but it would cause more complications than anything else. Most notably in New York State. New York State has a rule that track and field competitions can't go over 2 days. So
wait, hold on. That's a rule law in the state of New York.
In the high school activities association, yes.
Wow.
And so if we expanded to a fourth day, well, what's going to go on that fourth day? Is it now that the high school program, for whether it's boys specifically or girls specifically, can only go over 2 days?
Huh.
So that's why it's part of the way that it's split up, that the boys are only Friday, Saturday, and the girls are Thursday, Friday, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Going to a fourth day, I mean, yeah, we could add a lot of other things, but why? Yes, we can always add more. This event can be as big as we want it to be,
right?
But what is the purpose behind that? Like, what is it? What additional is that accomplishing? And there may be a lot of people say, hey, yeah, more people get to participate, and that may be true, but there's so much else that goes into that. The sheer cost of the city of Philadelphia being shut down for 3 days.
Right.
So now you're saying it's going to be shut down for 4 days. Like, there's so many moving parts. And if you adjust anything, even 1 degree, there's 90 other degrees of then adjustment that go into it. And so it's a large, very complicated thing, and it's challenging. So we try to add as much as we can, but to add something, it usually means we have to take something else away.
Yeah.
We don't really want to do that either.
Okay, last 2 topics, and then and I know, like, I've heard the phone ringing, the fax machine going. There's teams that are trying to get qualified right now. They're asking, can they get the 17th guy in the javelin? I know they are. I know you're busy, so we got last 2 topics here for you, Aaron. One is, we'd be remiss to talk about the Penn Relays if we didn't dive a little bit into the culture of the Caribbeans and specifically the Jamaican athletes that come up to the Penn Relays there in Philadelphia. Talk to us about that. Are there logistics issues? How is it just a normal, like, oh yeah, they're just a team, so we put them in and have, the culture of Jamaica and the Caribbeans in the Philadelphia area is what helped build that, I think, if I remember correctly from reading way back in the day. But talk to us about, like, is that special challenging, or is it just another high school or another pro team coming for the USA versus World thing?
It takes a lot of people to make those things happen. And as an NCAA institution, we're very, very limited on what we can and cannot do, because these are all prospective student athletes.
Right.
So the University of Pennsylvania is extremely limited on what can be done. And so there is an organization called Team Jamaica Bickle. They're one of our sponsors and one of our, I guess you could say, our team members, right? They help fund and coordinate for those teams from Jamaica to come and attend. And what they accomplish is unbelievable. Everything from correspondence with the schools and making sure that they're taken care of, to housing them everything from hotels to staying at people's homes. Kind of a funny story. My son's pediatric dentist, she is Jamaican. She is from Kingston and came to the United States for dental school and college and everything. And she's from Jamaica, so she's a big track and field fan. And when she found out I was in this new role at the Penn Relays, she's like, oh, that's incredible. I house the teams from Homewood Tech every year because that's the school that I went.
Oh, wow.
So my son's dentist, even, and she lives in New Jersey, houses a team from Homewood Tech every year so that they have somewhere to stay and they make some meals for them. It's incredible the amount of effort that goes for those teams to come from the international places. So Team Jamaica Bickle fundraises and works with those schools to be able to get them here. And then as far as the Penn Relays is concerned, they're treated the same as any other high school team would be. They've got to register by the deadlines. They have to pay for their packets just the same, and tickets and so forth. We aren't able to really do a whole lot beyond that, just per NCAA rules, right? It's challenging. But those rules are in place for a reason. And so historically, the Jamaican teams first started coming in the 60s, and it's just continued to grow from there. It really took off when some of these Jamaican athletes were, kind of put on the world scale for the first time. And some of them were being seen in front of college coaches for the first time. And the most notable one coming from the Penn Relays was Merlene Ottey. Mm-hmm. And Merlene Ottey came to the Penn Relays, and this is in the beginning when women were first able to participate in the Penn Relays. And she showed how good she was. The University of Nebraska was at the meet. They offered her a scholarship, and that opened up a direct line for recruiting for the U.S. institutions. And for a long time there, that was your means of seeing these Jamaican athletes was coming to the Penn Relays. And recruiting rules at that time were about different than they are now. If you come to one of these meets now, like, there's a lot of restrictions for NCAA rules for good reason of what you can and cannot do while the athlete, you want the athlete heading out on the track and you're like, hey, I'm from school X and we'd love to have you come. Here's my card, as they've got a baton in their hand. So there's a lot of restrictions and things, but it's an opportunity to come and see. And then as far as like the crowd goes, the cool thing with the Jamaicans is so Jamaica Queens, where JFK Airport is, right at the mouth of Long Island and everything, is an incredibly large Jamaican population. Both New York and Pennsylvania, both the Philadelphia region specifically, there's just a tremendous amount of Jamaicans. And so for them, it's their opportunity to come and see, the future of what the sport is going to be. Right. Like, who is the next big star? Usain Bolt ran at the Penn Relays in high school. Johan Blake, in fact, his St. Jago team was the first team to break 40 seconds in the high school teams at the Penn Relays. So these big names all ran here in high school. They got their start at Penn Relays. And the thing that's cool is it allows these thousands and thousands of Jamaicans that live in this area to come and see, because they don't have the ability to go down for champs, and they can't go down, as much as they would like to. So they can come to Philadelphia and they can watch all of these kids that ran at champs just a few weeks earlier. One other thing that was explained to me for the first time this last year that I wasn't aware of, at champs, the way that they break it up, more or less, it's 9th and 10th graders competing against each other, and it's 11th and 12th graders competing against. More or less, that's how it's divided up. But then they come to the Penn Relays, and now Homewood Tech can use 9th through 12th graders, and they're all running together. So that's part of the reason you see just these incredibly fast times. And part of the reason that it's so exciting of, a high school girls 4x4 team running 3:30, or a high school boys 4x8 running 7:24. Like, those things are happening because now, like, the coach can finally combine forces. And one last thing that's really interesting with Jamaica is this last year, I kind of got a full tour of what Jamaican high school looks like, right? All of the best coaches in Jamaica are high school coaches. That's where they put the most emphasis. That's where they put the most time and energy and resources, because they realize that's the starting point. That's the backbone. And that gets them headed on that right path. They know then what a lot of these kids, if they compete collegiately, they're going to come to, more than likely, the United States, to a large D1 institution, and they're going to be coached well there. And then when they go pro, now they have kind of the choice of who they want to be coached by and where they want to be coached. And so their efforts and their energy and everything is in these high school coaches. And you can see it. You can see it on the track. There's a reason that the Jamaicans don't drop batons at world championships and Olympic games.
Yeah, you brought that up. I was not going to bring up anything related to that.
Hey, I'm not talking about any of the countries that might or might not drop the baton at such events. But
you're the Penn Relays. There are no baton drops. Come on, you're the epitome of relay meets.
There are not a lot. Well, I can't say this. Yes, there's definitely baton drops. Not a lot of baton drops, though, because they are coached up so well They know what they're doing, and my goodness, they are so talented, and it is just so fun to watch them be able to run. And so we always pray that it's, not a cold Philadelphia spring day, because if it's hot, the times are going to be incredible, because now all of a sudden the Jamaicans' muscles are warmed to a proper temperature, and look out, it's going to be fast.
That's a lot of fun. Very unique aspect of Penn Relays, and very unique based on the geographical location of the Penn Relays as well. Okay, Aaron, I lied. I said I had two more topics. I actually thought of a third one, so I'm going to slip this. It's a quickie though. Into number two here. You mentioned about the number of packets that you had to put together at the Armory. Well, that got exploded here at the Penn Relays. How many people does it take? Because I remember doing packets when we at Mississippi State, and it just stinks, getting all the bibs and counting out the safety pins and the wristbands that you got to do. How many people does it take to put together all these packets for a Penn Relays?
A lot. This past year, goodness, all hands on deck. I mean, as many as we could get. Steve had several members of the Penn track team. They came in shifts, and
right. It's not an event, right? It has to happen over time frame.
Yeah, I mean, it was a few different days. It's quite a process.
Wow.
And there are some logistical things that we do ahead of time that kind of help us to make that a little bit easier. But it's a massive process.
I just started thinking about that. I was like, man, we take that for granted. We get our packet and we move on. It's like, no, someone had to make 10,000 of those or whatnot. It's just amazing. Okay.
Is just over 65,000 bibs. And
that's crazy.
Every athlete has a bib on the front and back. And then if you run in the prelim and then you make the final, it's a different set of bibs for the final.
Dude. All right. Last topic, because there's no way we can talk. I mean, there's a lot of things that you just can't not talk about with the Penn Relays, but the culmination, what we're all, I shouldn't say we're all going for, but one of the things that we strive for as we take a team to the Penn Relays is the famed wagon wheel. Like, I still remember, I think we won the 4x2 both years at Mississippi State there. And it's a big deal. I mean, like, those things go up on our wall when we get back to the office. I mean, it is one of the more unique trophies, plaques, what do you want to call it, awards for winning a meet. But it is it's a sign of accomplishment. When recruits go in, coaches show them their wagon wheels. I mean, it's a big deal. Talk to us about, I just don't know enough about, like, how are those things made? Are they easy to make? Do they cost $1 billion each? I don't know. Tell us a little bit about that to round us out today.
So the history behind it, they were first handed out, and I'm going to get the dates wrong here, and then I'm going to have people like, oh my
so someone's going to start yelling at you. They're listening right now, like, no.
I believe it started in the 20s, and the wheels are only awarded to the Championship of America. So there's two different sizes.
Right.
There's one that's 36 inches across, and that's the large one, and that's awarded to all the Championship of America champions. So that's the high school 4x1 Championship of America, college 4x1, and so forth. And the Championship of America is the fastest of the fast. Right. Then there's a smaller wheel. I think it's about 14 inches across, and those are given out to each heat of the 4x1 and 4x4 is considered its own section. And if you're a section winner, you get a small wheel.
Oh, is that right?
We give out just over 200 of the small wheels over the course of the weekend, because, I mean, you win your section at the Penn Relays, like, that's worth acknowledgement. We do mix the heats in the 4x1 and 4x4 a little bit to where it's some geographics, right? So you don't have we keep them relatively kind of close to the same ability levels and things. There is some mixing in there, but yeah, you win your heat at the Penn Relays, that's a big deal, and so that's why we award the small wheel. But the wheel was first started being awarded in the 20s or 30s, and it's just continued to evolve. It's a little bit deceiving. They're not as heavy as they look.
Right.
They look like they're solid wood. They're not. It's kind of pressed particle board, for lack of a better description. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a relatively light thing. So when you see those photos of a team holding it well above their heads,
Right.
it's not that they have all of a sudden got crazy adrenaline flowing through them. It's that it's not quite that heavy. But after a team wins, they come out on the podium, they get that famous shot in front of Waitman Hall. The wheel is handed to them and they get it home by any means necessary.
Yeah, so good luck.
So it's obviously it's a nice carry on for those that are flying, and so yeah, it's a big deal. On the high school stage, there's nothing more challenging in high school athletics, in my opinion, than winning a championship of America.
Right.
Because if you do that in the 4x1 or the 4x4 or the 4x8, what that means is you're probably the best high school team in one of those 4 events in the world. Because if you beat the Jamaicans, then who else in the world is going to beat you in those events?
Right.
And so it's an incredible accomplishment. And the high school teams that have won the most wheels or do these other things, it's the best of the best. And high school national records are broken, and those teams are 3rd or 4th in the meet. Because I didn't pull them up. I should have pulled them up before this, but the Jamaica or the Penn Relays records in the 4x1, the 4x4, and the 4x8 at the high school level are incredible. The high school record in the 4x4 for the boys is 3:03. It is, NCAA final worthy, like, type team. The high school record in the 4x8 for the boys is 7:24. And the high school girls, it's absolutely unbelievable. The times that are run year in, year out, the Penn Relays records, if you got 2 or 3 US teams built into there, it's, wow, that's really cool. And they're often the national record holders. So when you go back and you look at the history of the US teams that have won those wheels, it was quite an accomplishment. It's much easier to win a national championship than it is to win a Penn Relays wheel.
Well, Aaron, we have you here. You're on record. You're on video. So I'm going to put you on the spot. As we should always be doing this, pushing the envelope, doing things differently, a little bit differently, trying to make things better and keep improving. And sometimes we do that with things that don't need to be touched. Tell us right now, and we're going to hold you to it. You're the new guy there at Penn. You and Steve both overseeing the Penn Relay. Dave did this. He wasn't going to change this. I just know this. But let's make sure you two are not going to touch this aspect of the Penn Relays. Tell us that the wagon wheel will stay and remain for years and decades to come as the premier award at the Penn Relays.
Yeah, it's one of the most iconic awards, definitely in the sport, if not in all sports. It's very recognizable. It's obviously what it is, since it says Penn Relay Carnival on around it. But yeah, it's an iconic thing. It's I'm certainly not doing anything. What a cool thing! Like, what a great thing! Like, it's more people probably have seen or know what those wheels are, at least seen those, than any other aspect of the meet. So yeah. Unless it still removes the Stanley Cup, no. We're not moving this. It's pretty awesome.
All right, good. We got you on. So if it happens here in the next year or two, we're going to come back and say, hey, what happened, Aaron? It wasn't you, obviously. You said if it's going to happen, it wouldn't be you. But it's just one of those things that's like, this kind of tradition that needs to reign supreme as you continue into the 135th and 40th and 150th, which will be here before we know it, by the way, running of the Penn Relays. Aaron, you're busy. You got to go. Thank you so much. It is so awesome to have an event, a cultural event like the Penn Relays, and kind of pull back the curtains and see behind the scenes what's going on. You said it perfectly, from us on the outside watching on TV, or if we're in the stands, or even a lot of times when we're coaching, it feels like that quote unquote well-oiled machine. It's like, oh yeah, nothing ever goes wrong here. And having run events and done anything in life, that's not the case, but it is the case of good leadership and good support and volunteers and helpers that when things do go unplanned, we won't say wrong, unplanned, that we get back on plan and everybody still has an amazing experience walking away from their Penn Relays experience. It's something that they'll remember for a lifetime. And so thank you so much for being here today to kind of give us that little peek behind the curtain, man. It was so fascinating. So thankful for your time today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And see, the phone just rang. He's got his next meeting to go to right now. So thanks for being here today this week as we kind of peel back the curtain on those wagon wheels there for the Penn Relays. I hope you learned something. I know I sure did. And I can't wait. I haven't been in a long time. I can't wait to get to my next Penn Relays. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.